Hey guys, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Like, share, and comment your thoughts on today's story. Also, what kind of stories do you want next? Quick question. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments. My name is Victoria Hayes, and for most of my life, I learned one simple lesson. The people who smile the sweetest often hide the sharpest knives. I was 36 years old, the founder of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country, and according to every magazine that loved ranking wealthy women, I had everything. Money. Success, a beautiful estate, a private jet, a company worth hundreds of millions, but there was one thing I never had: a family. My father died when I was 12. My mother passed away when I was 23. No brothers, no sisters, no children, no husband, just work. For years, work became my entire world. People looked at my life and assumed I must be happy. What they didn't understand was that success can buy almost anything except the feeling of coming home to someone who genuinely loves you. That loneliness was exactly why I trusted people too easily, and that trust nearly destroyed me. It all started with my housekeeper. Her name was Emily Carter. When I hired her 3 years earlier, she seemed perfect. Hardworking, polite, respectful, she came highly recommended. At first, she was everything I could have hoped for. The mansion stayed spotless. Meals were prepared on time. Everything ran smoothly. Eventually, I stopped seeing her as an employee. I saw her as someone I could trust. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was believing gratitude and loyalty were the same thing. They aren't, not even close. One Friday afternoon, I decided to leave the office early. Normally, I stayed until 7 or 8 in the evening, but I had spent the entire week buried in meetings. I was exhausted. I wanted one quiet night at home. No phone calls, no investors. No board meetings, just peace. As my driver pulled through the gates of my estate, something felt strange. The driveway was full, cars everywhere, luxury SUVs, sports cars. Vehicles I'd never seen before. I frowned. Maybe Emily had visitors. I didn't mind. Everyone deserves a social life. But as I walked toward the front entrance, loud music shook the windows. My stomach tightened. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and froze. The sight in front of me didn't even feel real. My living room looked like a nightclub. Dozens of strangers filled the mansion. People were drinking, dancing, eating, laughing. Someone was standing on my imported Italian coffee table. Someone else had their feet on a sofa that cost more than most cars. Empty bottles covered every surface. Food was smeared across furniture. One woman was taking selfies in front of a painting worth nearly $70,000. Nobody noticed me, not at first. Then I saw Emily. She stood near the fireplace wearing an expensive dress I'd never seen before. A glass of champagne rested in her hand. Around her stood a group of people listening attentively. She looked like a queen addressing her subjects. Then I heard what she said. "Honestly, owning a mansion is exhausting." Everyone laughed. One man nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine," Emily sighed dramatically. "The staff constantly needs supervision." I stopped breathing. The staff, owning a mansion, what was she talking about? Then she continued. "My financial advisor keeps telling me to diversify investments." More laughter, more admiration. A woman asked, "How many properties do you own now?" Emily smiled. "Oh, just a few." The room practically worshipped her. I stood there staring, unable to believe what I was hearing. Then someone finally noticed me. A young woman looked in my direction. Her smile disappeared. "Who's that?" Emily turned. Our eyes met. For one brief second, pure panic flashed across her face. Then it vanished, and something else replaced it. Arrogance, cold arrogance. She walked toward me slowly, not like an employee, like someone confronting an unwanted guest. When she stopped in front of me, she crossed her arms. "What are you doing here?" I blinked. "What?" Her voice sharpened. "This is a private event." I thought maybe she was joking. Surely this had to be some misunderstanding. "Emily," I said carefully. What exactly is going on? Several guests gathered around us, watching, listening, waiting. Emily rolled her eyes dramatically. Look, I don't know who invited you. A few people chuckled. But this isn't a shelter. The room laughed. I stared at her. She pointed toward the front door. You need to leave. Silence. I honestly thought I had misheard. Leave. Yes. She tilted her head. You can't just walk into someone's house. Someone behind her laughed. Another guest whispered loudly. People have no boundaries these days. More laughter. My heart pounded, not from anger, from disbelief, because suddenly I understood. Emily wasn't pretending for fun. She wasn't telling harmless stories. She had convinced every person in this room that she owned my mansion, and they believed her, every single one of them. I looked around. Nobody recognized me. Most people only knew me from business magazines, and I rarely attended social events. To them, I was just another woman standing in the doorway, a stranger, an inconvenience. Emily stepped closer. If you leave now, I won't call security. The room exploded with laughter. Security, in my own house. I slowly looked around the room, at the strangers drinking my wine, eating my food, destroying my property, and treating me like an intruder. Then I smiled, a small smile, the kind that appears right before a storm. Emily saw it. And for the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and made a call. Emily folded her arms. Who are you calling? I never took my eyes off her. My lawyer. The room became quiet. Emily laughed nervously. Your lawyer? I nodded. Yes. Then I smiled wider. Because every person in this room is about to learn a very expensive lesson. And suddenly, nobody was laughing anymore. The laughter died almost instantly. You know that moment when people sense something is wrong but haven't figured out exactly what? That was the atmosphere in the room. Emily tried to keep smiling, tried being the important word. Because I could see the nervousness creeping into her face. The guests looked back and forth between us. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew who to believe. But the confidence Emily had been displaying all evening suddenly looked forced. She folded her arms tighter. Look, I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, but you're embarrassing yourself. I calmly lowered my phone. I don't think I'm the one embarrassing myself. A few people exchanged uneasy glances. Emily laughed again, too loudly, too quickly, the kind of laugh people make when they're afraid. Seriously, she said, turning toward her guests. Can you believe this woman? Nobody answered. That scared her even more, because 5 minutes earlier they would have laughed immediately. Now they weren't sure. I walked farther into the living room. Emily instantly stepped in front of me. You can't go in there. I looked at her. Why not? This is private property. The irony almost made me smile. Private property, my property. I slowly turned toward the massive stone fireplace. Above it hung a framed photograph. One of my favorites, a picture taken on the day my company went public. I stood in front of the photo, then pointed at it. Interesting. Emily's face lost color. One guest looked closer. Wait, another guest stepped forward. Isn't that? Someone else gasped. Oh my God. The room went silent because the woman standing in the photograph was me, not a younger version. Not someone who looked similar, me, the exact same face, the exact same eyes, the exact same woman, standing right there. One man frowned. Why is your picture in her house? Emily swallowed, hard. For the first time all evening, she had no answer. A woman near the kitchen stared at me. You're Victoria Hayes. I nodded. The room exploded. Oh my God, that's Victoria Hayes, the CEO. No way, I've seen her on Forbes. That's her. Emily's entire body stiffened. The carefully built fantasy she'd been living inside for 3 years was beginning to crack, and she knew it. Still, she tried one last desperate lie. She forced a laugh. Of course she's Victoria Hayes. The room looked at her. Emily pointed toward me. She's obsessed with me. I nearly laughed. Excuse me, she nodded quickly. She's a former employee. Now even the guests looked confused. A former employee? Yes. Emily grabbed onto the lie like a drowning person grabbing a life raft. She got fired years ago. People exchanged looks. The story didn't make sense, not even a little. I reached into my purse again. This time I pulled out a small black keycard. The master security card. The card that controlled every security system on the property. Then I walked toward the control panel near the front entrance. Emily's eyes widened. "Don't touch that." I ignored her. Beep. The system activated instantly. A female voice echoed through the mansion. "Welcome home, Miss Hayes." Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Emily looked like she might faint. The security system continued. "Owner authentication confirmed." One guest dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the floor. Nobody even reacted. Every eye in the room was locked on Emily. And suddenly, she wasn't the wealthy homeowner anymore. She wasn't the successful businesswoman. She wasn't the glamorous socialite. She was just a housekeeper standing in someone else's mansion. Caught, completely, publicly, humiliatingly. Caught. A woman near the dining room stepped backward. "You told us this house belonged to you." Emily opened her mouth. Nothing came out. A man pointed toward the luxury cars outside. "You said those were yours." More silence. Another guest spoke. "You told everyone your company made millions every month." Emily looked trapped, like an animal surrounded from every direction. Then the front doors opened. My legal team arrived first. 3 attorneys, 2 security specialists, and my chief operating officer. The room instantly felt smaller, more serious, more dangerous. My lead attorney, Sarah Mitchell, approached calmly. "Good evening, Miss Hayes." I nodded. "Sarah." She looked around the room, then at the dozens of strangers occupying my home. "Would you like us to begin documenting everything?" "Yes," Emily panicked. "Documenting what?" Sarah turned toward her. "The property damage." Emily's face turned white. "What property damage?" Sarah looked around. The stained furniture, the broken decorations. The wine spilled across imported rugs, the scratches on antique wood, the destroyed flower arrangements. The cigarette burns, the shattered glass. The damage was everywhere. And suddenly everyone realized something terrifying. Every broken item had a price, a very large price. Sarah spoke calmly. "Based on a preliminary assessment, damages already appear to exceed $100,000. Gasps filled the room. 100,000. People immediately started backing away from tables. From furniture, from walls, like physical distance could somehow erase responsibility. Emily looked like she might collapse. "No," Sarah nodded. "Actually, likely much more." Then she smiled politely. "We'll know after the full inspection." One woman burst into tears. Another started apologizing immediately. Several people grabbed their coats, trying to leave. Big mistake. The security team closed the exits, not aggressively, professionally. One guard spoke clearly. "Please remain inside until statements are collected." Panic spread through the room. Real panic. The kind that comes when people realize consequences are no longer theoretical. Emily suddenly rushed toward me. "Victoria!" Interesting, now she remembered my name. "Victoria, please!" I looked at her quietly. She grabbed my arm. Tears instantly appeared. Hollywood-level tears. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I pulled my arm away. "Didn't you?" Her lip trembled. "No, you told everyone this mansion belonged to you. I was embarrassed. You used my cars." Silence. "You hosted parties." More silence. "You lied to dozens of people." Tears streamed down her face. "I just wanted people to respect me." The room watched. Nobody defended her now. Nobody rushed to help. Because the moment people discover power has shifted, their loyalty usually shifts too. I had seen it happen 1,000 times in business, and now I was watching it happen here. Emily looked around desperately, searching for support. She found none, not one person, not a single ally, because everyone was busy protecting themselves. And for the first time all evening, Emily stood completely alone. I looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman I had trusted for 3 years. The woman who had eaten dinner at my table. The woman whose medical bills I'd paid when her mother got sick. The woman I had treated like family, and I felt something worse than anger. Disappointment, deep disappointment. The kind that hurts far more than rage ever could. "Why?" I asked quietly. Emily broke down crying. Real crying this time, not performance, not manipulation, actual tears. Because I think she finally understood, not what she had done, but what she had lost. And that loss was only beginning. The police still hadn't arrived. The lawsuits hadn't started. The news hadn't broken. The evidence hadn't been reviewed. The consequences hadn't even begun. But standing in that living room, watching every lie collapse around her, Emily finally realized the truth. Her life was about to change forever, and not in the way she imagined. The first police cruiser arrived 10 minutes later, then another, and another. Red and blue lights flashed across the mansion windows, painting the walls with streaks of color. Inside, nobody spoke. The energy that had filled the party earlier was gone. The music had been turned off. The laughter had disappeared. The champagne glasses sat untouched. Everyone looked nervous. Everyone except me. I stood near the fireplace while officers entered the house. My attorney, Sarah, greeted them immediately. Within minutes, statements were being collected. Names were recorded. Photographs were taken. Damage was documented, and every passing second made Emily look worse. Much worse. She sat on the edge of a chair, pale and shaking. Several guests had already admitted that Emily told them she owned the mansion. Others confirmed she had hosted similar gatherings before. That caught my attention. I looked toward Sarah. "What do you mean, similar gatherings?" A woman raised her hand nervously. "This isn't the first one." The room became quiet. My eyes moved toward Emily. Her face lost what little color remained. "How many?" I asked. Nobody answered. Finally, a man spoke. "At least 6. My stomach tightened. "6, he nodded. "Maybe more." I looked directly at Emily. She stared at the floor. Unable to meet my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 6 parties, 6 separate occasions, dozens of strangers inside my home, using my property, damaging my belongings. While I was traveling for business, while I trusted her completely, the betrayal felt heavier than before, much heavier. Then one of the officers approached me. "Miss Hayes, yes, we may have another issue." Something in his tone made me straighten immediately. "What kind of issue?" He held up a tablet. "Would you recognize these items?" The screen showed photographs. My heart stopped. Jewelry, expensive jewelry, my jewelry, a diamond bracelet, an emerald necklace. A vintage gold watch that belonged to my father. I stared at the images. "Where did you find these?" The officer looked toward Emily. "We found listings online." The room froze. Emily's head snapped upward. "No," the officer ignored her. "Several luxury items from this residence appear to have been sold over the past 18 months. I felt cold, very cold. Sarah immediately stepped forward. "Can you confirm ownership?" I nodded. Every item shown belonged to me, every single one. Emily stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. "I can explain." Nobody responded. "I was going to replace them." Still nobody responded. "I borrowed them." Borrowed. The word echoed through the room. Borrowed, not stole, borrowed. As if selling someone else's property was some temporary misunderstanding. The officer continued scrolling. More photographs appeared. Designer handbags, watches, collectible artwork, antique silver. The total value climbed higher, and higher, and higher, until Sarah quietly whispered a number. $480,000. The room gasped. Nearly $500,000. Emily collapsed back into her chair. The officers exchanged looks. At that point, this wasn't simple trespassing anymore. This was becoming something much bigger, much more serious. I looked at Emily. 3 years. 3 years I had trusted her. 3 years she had access to every room in the house, every closet, every safe, every cabinet, and apparently she'd been stealing the entire time. The realization hurt, not because of the money. Money comes back, trust doesn't. One of the guests suddenly stood up. "Wait!" Everyone looked at him. He pointed at Emily. Does Jason know about this? Emily's eyes widened. Pure panic. My attorney noticed immediately. Who's Jason? Nobody answered. The man swallowed, then spoke. Her fiancé. The room became silent again. Fiancé? Emily had never mentioned being engaged. Not once. The officer frowned. Where is he? The man looked uncomfortable. He thinks she's rich. Interesting, very interesting. I watched Emily carefully. Her reaction told me everything. The officer folded his arms. Explain. Emily looked trapped, completely trapped. And finally, the truth started coming out. Little by little, piece by piece, like a collapsing wall. She wiped tears from her face, then whispered, Jason thinks I own everything. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Emily stared at the floor. He thinks I'm wealthy, Sarah asked softly. Because you told him that? Emily nodded. The room erupted. Several guests started talking at once. You lied to him too. He proposed because he thought you were rich. Oh my God. Emily covered her face, crying again, this time harder than before, because unlike the mansion lie, unlike the party lie, unlike the social media lies, this one had cost her something personal, something real. The officer looked at her. How long? Emily's voice barely came out. 2 years. 2 years. 2 years of pretending. 2 years of fake stories. 2 years of borrowed luxury. 2 years of living inside someone else's life. Then her phone rang. Everyone heard it. The screen lit up. One name appeared. Jason read. Nobody said anything. The room watched. Emily stared at the phone like it was a bomb. It kept ringing, and ringing, and ringing. Finally, she answered. Hello. The entire room was silent. We could hear his voice through the speaker. Not every word, just enough. Emily, what is happening? Her face drained. More silence. Then his voice became louder. I just saw the news. News. I looked toward Sarah. She checked her phone, then sighed. It already leaked. Of course it had. A mansion, a fake millionaire, police. Luxury theft. The story was irresistible. Jason continued speaking. What did you do? Emily started crying again. Jason, please let me explain. No, his voice cracked, not with anger. With heartbreak, the worst kind. Were any of it real? Emily couldn't answer. The silence itself became an answer. Everyone in the room felt it. Then came the question. The one that shattered everything. Did you ever love me? Emily closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The room remained completely still, and for the first time all night. Nobody felt anger toward her, only pity, because sometimes the moment a lie dies, everything built on top of it dies too. A few seconds later, the call ended. No yelling, no threats, no drama. Just silence, the quiet ending of something that once mattered. Emily lowered the phone and stared at the floor. Broken, completely broken. The officers continued their investigation. The guests were eventually allowed to leave after providing statements. One by one, they disappeared into the night, until only a handful of people remained. Emily, the police, my legal team, and me. The mansion felt enormous now, empty, cold, quiet, like it was finally breathing again after being invaded. I walked toward the large windows overlooking the estate. The moonlight stretched across the gardens. Everything looked peaceful, but inside the house, nothing would ever be the same. Behind me, officers informed Emily she would need to accompany them for further questioning. She didn't argue, didn't resist, didn't cry. She simply nodded. Like someone too exhausted to fight anymore. Before leaving, she looked at me one last time. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Victoria! I turned around. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I studied her for several seconds, then answered honestly. I believe you are. Another tear rolled down her cheek. But being sorry doesn't undo what happened. She nodded slowly. Because deep down, she already knew that. The officers escorted her toward the door, and just before she stepped outside, she stopped, looked back at the mansion. The mansion she had pretended to own, the life she had pretended to live, the future she had pretended to deserve. Then she walked away, and the front door closed behind her, for good. 3 months later, I sat quietly in a courtroom. The mansion scandal had become old news by then. The headlines had faded. The social media discussions had moved on. The internet always finds a new story, a new villain, a new victim, a new distraction. But for the people living through it, the consequences remained, especially for Emily. I hadn't seen her since the night she was escorted out of my home. Until now, when she entered the courtroom, I barely recognized her. The expensive clothes were gone. The designer handbags were gone. The carefully crafted image was gone. She wore a simple gray suit, no luxury jewelry, no glamorous makeup, no confidence, just a tired woman carrying the weight of her own choices. For the first time since I had known her, she looked honest. The hearing lasted several hours. Financial records were reviewed, evidence was presented, witness statements were read, every lie. Every theft, every fraudulent sale, every unauthorized party, everything was documented. The facts were overwhelming. There was no defense left, no alternative explanation, no clever argument. Only truth, and truth can be brutal. Eventually, the judge asked a question. "Miss Carter, would you like to make a statement?" The courtroom became silent. Emily stood slowly. Her hands trembled. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then finally, she looked up and began. "I spent most of my life feeling invisible." The room listened. "When I was growing up, we were poor." She paused. "Not struggling, not barely getting by, poor." Her voice cracked. "The kind of poor where you learn early that people treat you differently." Nobody interrupted. "When wealthy people entered a room, everyone paid attention." She swallowed. "When people like me entered a room, nobody noticed." The courtroom remained silent. "So when I started working in Miss Hayes' home," she glanced toward me, "I saw a life I thought I'd never have." Tears appeared in her eyes. "At first, I only imagined it." She laughed sadly. "Then I started pretending." Another pause. "Then pretending became lying." Her voice dropped lower. "And eventually, lying became stealing." No excuses, no blaming, no manipulation, just honesty. For perhaps the first time in years, Emily wiped her eyes. "I kept telling myself I'd stop." She shook her head. "But every lie required another lie." The judge listened carefully. "The entire room did. Then people started admiring me." She laughed bitterly. "They respected me." Another tear fell. "They respected a person who didn't exist." The courtroom was completely still. Emily looked down. "I lost myself." The silence that followed felt heavy, not because her explanation excused anything. It didn't, not even close, but because everyone understood something important. Most disasters don't begin with evil. They begin with weakness, one bad decision, then another, until the person no longer recognizes themselves. The judge eventually delivered the ruling. Restitution, financial penalties, probation, community service, permanent professional consequences. The sentence was serious, but fair. When the hearing ended, people slowly began leaving. I gathered my things, prepared to leave. Then I heard a voice. "Victoria!" I turned. Emily stood near the courtroom doors, alone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she handed me something, a small envelope. I frowned. "What is this?" She swallowed. "A letter." I stared at it. "A letter," she nodded. "I wrote it months ago." I accepted the envelope. Then she gave a small, sad smile. "You don't have to read it." After that, she walked away and disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her again. That evening, I sat in my study. The house was quiet, peaceful, the way it used to be. The envelope sat on my desk. For a long time, I simply stared at it. Then finally, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting shook in places. I read every word. She apologized, not for getting caught, not for losing, not for facing consequences, for hurting people, for betraying trust, for becoming someone she never intended to become. Near the end, one sentence stood out. "You gave me everything I needed to succeed, and I still chose to fail." I read that line several times, then folded the letter and placed it inside a drawer, not because I forgave her, and not because I hated her, but because some chapters deserve to be closed. A week later, something unexpected happened. My assistant entered my office carrying flowers. "These just arrived." I looked up. "No card." "There is." She handed it over. I opened it. Only 4 words were written: "Thank you for mercy," no name, no signature. But I knew exactly who sent them. Emily. I looked at the flowers for a long moment, then quietly placed the card inside my desk and returned to work. Life moved forward. It always does. The damaged furniture was replaced. The stolen items that could be recovered were returned. The mansion was restored. The wounds slowly healed. Some scars remained, but scars are proof of survival, not defeat. Months later, I received another unexpected call. It was Jason, Emily's former fiancé. We met for coffee, not because we were friends, but because closure sometimes arrives from unusual places. He looked older, tired, but peaceful. After a while, he smiled. "You know something funny?" "What?" He laughed softly. "I was angry for a long time." I nodded. "Understandable." Then he looked out the window. "But eventually I realized something." "What?" "The woman I loved never actually existed." The words hung in the air, sad, but true. After a few moments, he smiled again. "A strange thing happened after everything fell apart." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I finally started living honestly too." That made me smile. Because sometimes losing an illusion is the first step toward finding reality. 1 year later, I stood in my garden. The sun was setting. The sky glowed gold and orange. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Around my neck hung a small silver pendant. Inside it was a photograph. My parents, the people who taught me kindness, the people who taught me integrity, the people who taught me that character matters more than appearances. I touched the pendant lightly and thought about everything that had happened. Emily wanted respect. But respect cannot be stolen. She wanted admiration, but admiration built on lies never lasts. She wanted the appearance of success, but appearance and success are not the same thing, not even close. Real success is built slowly, quietly, honestly, day by day, choice by choice, truth by truth. I looked toward the horizon and smiled, because despite everything, I had gained something valuable. A reminder that trust is precious, that character matters, that wealth means nothing without integrity, and that eventually, every mask falls, every lie collapses, every truth comes to light, no matter how long it takes. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees, I turned toward the mansion and walked home. Not angry, not bitter, not vengeful, simply grateful. Grateful for the people who remained, grateful for the lessons learned, and grateful that no matter how convincing a lie may appear, the truth always has the final word. The end read.